In 2023, Bitcoin had what many call a renaissance. There were NFTs on Bitcoin, meme coins and tokens on Bitcoin, there were block size wars, fees spiked. It felt historic. But then, just as quickly as this hype cycle came, it faded. Volumes cooled, speculation eroded, and prices corrected. So here's the question. Was the famous Bitcoin renaissance just a flash in the pan, or did it create something more lasting? To answer this question, which is key for understanding the current innovation that's happening on Bitcoin, we'll go back and explore exactly what happened back then. For years after the block size wars of 2017, Bitcoin continued to ossify. If you wanted to build anything outside of Bitcoin payments, you went to Ethereum. There was actually a new financial system being completely rebuilt on blockchain rails on Ethereum, a separate blockchain that does have programmable features.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And I see Ethereum as kind of, this brave proof of concept that actually went out there and said, hey, can we take those Bitcoin ideals and can we make it do more and do so safely?
Errol Binari, who created the canonical indexer for BRC20 tokens, which we'll get into later, and is also the founder of the BRC 2.0, describes that era perfectly.
Originally, the dream was to build on Bitcoin, but it couldn't be done properly, let's say. There was colored coins that tried to achieve some stuff, but didn't work out much. But anyways, I moved on to Ethereum world.
Like many early Bitcoin builders, Errol moved to Ethereum because that's where you could actually build applications. But something shifted in 2022.
Best in Slot originally started as a DeFi company for EVM chains, basically. But when Ordinals happened, within the first week, one of my friends was like, hey, you really need to look into it. It was very interesting because it was a new way of building things. Ordinals was extremely simple. And back then, I was like, oh, because personally, we wanted to do things on Bitcoin before, but we couldn't do. And now we can, was interesting by itself. So we repurposed the indexing engine that we have for Bitcoin. It was quite easy because we built it for much faster EVM chains. But when you have 10-minute block times, it was a interesting pivot, let's say. And then after Ordinals, BRC20 happened. That's when we were like, okay, this is gonna go crazy.
But before we get into all the craziness of Ordinals, BRC20s, and rooms, let's talk about what actually enabled all of this innovation. And that's Taproot. Taproot is a Bitcoin upgrade, which seemed small at first. It was activated in November 2021, and the changes looked simple. They improved how data could be encoded in transactions, they made complex scripts look like simple payments, and they increased the efficiency and privacy for multi-signature setups. At the time, most people saw Taproot as incremental, but in hindsight, it was a pivotal change for Bitcoin because it expanded Bitcoin's expressive surface area. And this surface area is exactly what Ordinals leveraged. In early 2023, Casey Rodarmor launched Ordinals. Ordinals did two things. They numbered every Bitcoin Satoshi so that they could be unique, and they enabled inscriptions, which means that you could add any arbitrary data like text, images, code directly to individual sats. A reminder that Bitcoin Satoshis or sats are like Bitcoin cents. So, like Ethereum NFTs, Ordinals became unique. But unlike most Ethereum NFTs, all Ordinals were directly on-chain. They did not rely on external storage or any external website. Isabel Fox and Duke, who is a Bitcoin researcher, explains the conceptual shift.
Ordinals was really sort of the birthplace, I guess, or the birth project, if you will, of this sort of Bitcoin renaissance that we're in now in the Bitcoin DeFi space, for lack of a better term. Casey Rodarmor, who is an incredibly talented, brilliant developer, had been working on this idea of how you could potentially put NFTs on Bitcoin natively on L1, created this incredibly, very elegant, very, very, very Bitcoin native protocol in which he essentially numbered every Satoshi on the Bitcoin blockchain, effectively giving them non-fungible properties. Ordinals basically was the first real use case of Bitcoin as a data availability layer, meaning as a network, as a database where you could store data rather than just simply moving around UTXOs, right? Or like moving around numbers on the ledger. And so when you think about Bitcoin as a data availability layer, that completely changes what Bitcoin can be.
So that's the key. Ordinals reframed Bitcoin from a payments layer to a data storage layer. Casey did not expect what happened next.
I had no idea how popular it would be. I thought it was entirely possible that it would be just niche and would exist and nobody would really care.
If ordinals are Bitcoin NFTs, then BRC20s are Bitcoin fungible tokens. But unlike Ethereum's ERC20s, BRC20s are not smart contract token standards. It's simpler. And like every innovation in the Bitcoin Renaissance, they involve taking the Bitcoin design and finding a workaround without actually changing it. So BRC20 was created in March of 2023 by an anonymous developer known as Domo. It was launched just weeks after Ordinals launched. BRC20s use simple JSON inscriptions to declare, deploy, mint, and transfer functions, while off-chain indexers track balances. Within 2 months, BRC20 tokens reached a combined market cap approaching $1 billion, turning Bitcoin into a memecoin battleground. People started inscribing JSON data representing token balances directly into Bitcoin transactions. Isabel explains.
And Domo, who's the creator of BRC20, he sort of was the first person to have this idea, although I certainly believe it would have come sooner or later if it wasn't Domo. He had this idea, well, if you can store image data on Bitcoin using ordinals, why not store ledger data or accounting data or data that represents a particular token or particular accounts of tokens? And so he essentially used the inscription envelope, which is sort of the part of a Bitcoin transaction where ordinal inscription data lives, or monkey picture data might live in the ordinals system. And he used that piece of a transaction to implement token account data, essentially, and sort of create a system for inventing tokens. And it was a very, very simple. Again, I won't necessarily call it elegant because it has some trade-offs that, regular ordinals don't have, but it was a very simple, arguably very populist architecture in the sense that you didn't even need to be a developer to use it. You're basically just inscribing token ledgers using JSON files right into inscription envelopes. So, Joe Schmo, who's never coded anything a day in his life, could literally create tokens on layer 1 on native Bitcoin. And that completely exploded Bitcoin native assets, or sort of like this next wave of the ordinals, Bitcoin season 2 renaissance to the next level. I mean, that took this from being just sort of a cutesy NFT standard on Bitcoin for monkey pictures or whatever into being a full-blown token protocol where you could have real trading, initiatives and, TVL, et cetera. And, I think within, a month or two of BRC20 being created, the volume of transactions on, Bitcoin via ordinals went, something like 10x, maybe even more than that within almost a month. I mean, it just completely took ordinals volume to the next level.
That's when things tipped. Because suddenly creating a token on Bitcoin didn't require a proposal, a fork. It didn't require changing the rules. Anyone, literally anyone, could inscribe a few lines of JSON and launch something new. And they did. Tokens like Ordi went from obscure to billion-dollar market caps in weeks. Speculators flooded in. Transaction queues swelled. Blocks filled faster than miners could process them. Fees climbed, and users competed for scarce block space. At certain point in 2023, more than half of all Bitcoin transactions were inscriptions related. That's crazy. Fee revenue surged into the tens of millions. For weeks at a time, every single Bitcoin block was packed. The pet rock was not so quiet anymore. The reaction was immediate. Bitcoin maxis just went after the Bitcoin Renaissance. They argued that Bitcoin is made to be hard money and that everything that was happening was just spam on the chain. Casey admits he didn't anticipate this reaction.
I had absolutely no idea. I don't think that I could have predicted the negative reaction. I think because I didn't predict that it would be popular enough to impact fees.
And that one comes from the other.
Yeah. And the other thing is that I have to say that a lot of the people who have been very anti-ordinals, they have been some of the strongest voices popularizing ordinals. Like in the early days when Adam Back, I love Adam Back, I respect him so much. He said, okay, yeah, maybe we should like filter ordinals. One, that's a terrible take. It's never going to work. But two, he has 500,000 followers who just learned about what ordinals are, right? So
everyone will find out anyway. I don't buy that one.
No one will find out. But the rapidity which it blew up, and the fact that it was like this drama meant that it was this coverable event. It wasn't like, oh, somebody made some niche NFT protocols. It was like no, the way that it blew up so fast. People were like, niche NFT protocol, and people are mad about it. And the big Bitcoiners are mad about it.
Well, yeah, I don't think I've got mad about it.
No, you haven't gotten mad about it.
I've got disappointed.
Isabel describes the internal fracture.
Ordinals also had a major impact on the culture of Bitcoiners. So all of a sudden you had this sort of bifurcation of Bitcoiners who were either excited about this change of using Bitcoin as a data availability layer and excited about the possibilities of what Bitcoin could be beyond just being a ledger or being a payments system, and folks who really were dedicated to keeping Bitcoin exclusively a payment system and exclusively a ledger for moving UTXOs back and forth. And the folks who were sort of anti using Bitcoin for data availability, right? They've like largely kind of, I think, created like a bit of a war between these two factions, right? This has created like a huge cultural disruption amongst Bitcoiners. And in that way, sort of fundamentally changed what a Bitcoiner means, right? What it means to be a Bitcoiner, right? Like the idea of Bitcoin maximalism has sort of fundamentally shifted because now you have this whole group of formerly identified Bitcoin maximalists who are now fissioning into groups who see Bitcoin in different ways and have different cultural attitudes towards Bitcoin. And so I think there's, kind of two major ways that ordinals shifted and really changed the way Bitcoiners think. It's like, number one, it changed the way particularly engineers and non-Bitcoin crypto think about building and on Bitcoin and think about what Bitcoin is. But also within the sort of previously understood Bitcoin community or previously understood Bitcoin maximalist community, if you will call them that, there's also been a major fission. And now there's different factions and different groups of types of Bitcoiners in a way that maybe didn't exist before Ordinals.
So the Renaissance wasn't just technical, it was ideological. Before Ordinals, building on Bitcoin was fringe. After Ordinals, building on Bitcoin was a lot less controversial. It became normal. The Overton window definitely shifted. By 2024, it became clear that there were cracks in BRC20s. The experiment had worked almost too well. The flood of tokens had started to swell Bitcoin's accounting system, the UTXO. Indexers were just straining to keep up, and what was meant to be a clever workaround had become cumbersome at scale. BRC20s proved fungible tokens could exist on Bitcoin, but it also proved that the design was far from elegant. So Casey went back to the drawing board. He introduced runes. Runes were built to work with Bitcoin's UTXO model instead of awkwardly around it. He designed runes so they would minimize state bloat and simplify how balances were tracked. They launched at a symbolic moment, the 2024 halving. And once again, history seemed to repeat itself. Activity surged, fees climbed, speculators returned. But this time, it felt different. The frenzy was shorter. The builders were more intentional, and the market seemed a little bit cooler. The fever did not run quite as hot this time. By late 2024, Ordinals markets cooled, BRC20 volumes dropped, and runes speculation faded. Isabel talks about this.
I would say that the Ordinals and BRC20 markets took a really strong hit. Like they took like a really difficult hit around the time of the last halvening. So I think that would be March 2024. And the markets haven't really recovered for kind of Bitcoin native assets broadly. Well, at that time, the entire Bitcoin market took a dive. So I don't know. So around that time, I'm trying to remember the exact numbers, but I think that we saw like at least 35-40% correction in spot Bitcoin at that time. So it wasn't an Ordinals BRC20 specific market correction. I mean, we were dealing with a crypto-wide market correction. And every time you have a market correction, some protocols survive and some don't, right? I mean, that's really like the bottom line is like when you have a market correction, you could have, ecosystems that are rallying like crazy. They dive with the rest of, the broader crypto ecosystem.
So was it just a hype cycle? Just another meme coin mania? Even if BRC20s, Ordinals, and Runes have cooled, much of the innovation happening today on Bitcoin comes as a result of the Bitcoin Renaissance.
Ordinals, in my opinion, completely changed the culture of Bitcoin in a couple of really important and key ways. So number one, it galvanized basically the entire broader non-Bitcoin crypto ecosystem to think differently about what Bitcoin could be. So many developers and engineers had left Bitcoin after falling in love with Bitcoin in 2012, 13, 14, 15, and eventually moved to Ethereum because the design space was broader, there was more utility possibility, there were more things you could potentially build with Bitcoin. And the assumption, of course, was that, Bitcoin isn't really made for anything other than payments. And Ordinals really challenged that assumption. But the technical legacy of these things not only lives on, but is continuing to progress in terms of what's been made possible as a result of these protocols and as a result of using Bitcoin for data availability. Again, I reference, BitVM and various bridging implementations, and everyone's talking about L2s on Bitcoin. So many of those architectures arguably would not exist, certainly would not have gotten the funding that they did if we didn't have Bitcoin Ordinals and sort of BRC20 and those sort of early meta protocols kind of explode in popularity in 2023. So I think that, this is a situation where it's not really entirely clear what will happen with the Ordinals or BRC20 markets long term, but the impact that the advancement of those technologies push forward lives on and will continue to live on. You can't put that cat back in the bag.
And about Bitcoin Maxi's backlash, here's what Ariel had to say.
Look, Bitcoin is ungovernable. Okay. I don't expect any big changes to come to Bitcoin. It's going to stay as is. That's my perspective. That's one. The second thing, it's like there is no stopping this train. Like miners are happy, users are happy. Like, who cares? 5 people talking about, spam. Nobody cares. Like, they're literally like 5 to 10 people just making noise. They have no power. They have zero power. And they can't do anything with this. It's like, this is happening. Like, people wanted to build, like myself, on Bitcoin before. There was all this like drama, like block size wars, etc. Like, a lot of builders moved on to Ethereum. Like, I was one of those people. I'm like, hey, like, I want to build stuff. There are these like guys who don't want anything to be built on this ledger. So I'm just going to move on to Ethereum. But like, that's not the case anymore. Anybody can like build. So I'm grateful to Casey for showing us the way how to build on Bitcoin. And this is just going to continue. You can't stop it.
For the first time in years, builders realized you could expand on Bitcoin's functionality without touching Bitcoin itself. Ironically, the Bitcoin Renaissance that Bitcoin Maxi said perverted the immaculate Bitcoin protocol is extremely cypherpunk, building on Bitcoin without asking for permission. No new opcodes were pushed, no hard forks were needed, no governance battle was fought. Just a reinterpretation of rules that had been there all along. The bar for modification is almost impossibly high. Ordinals proved you don't have to clear that bar. You could just work within the constraints and still unlock new behavior. That shift changed everything. It reignited serious conversations around Bitcoin innovation, Bitcoin L2s. It accelerated the BitVM research. It gave oxygen to native staking solutions. It made trust-minimized bridging experiments fundable, even fashionable. Developers who had left came back. Was Bitcoin's renaissance just a flash in the pan? The hype was, but the structural shift wasn't. Ordinals, BRC20s, and Rune expanded Bitcoin's expressive surface area. They normalized building on the L1, they shifted the maximalist ideology, they increased the fee market awareness, and they reopened developer imagination. They proved there's a new way to build on Bitcoin without changing Bitcoin. And once that door opened, nobody has been able to close it. Now that experimentation is normalized, the next phase is not inscriptions, it's infrastructure. Layer 2s, bridges, staking, programmability. The Renaissance wasn't the destination, it was the ignition. So stay tuned for episode 3.